Alright. Studio Series Dark of the Moon Q. What the? What's going on, everybody? Republic Cinema here, and in this video, we're going to be taking a look at the new Transformers Studio Series Dark of the Moon Deluxe Class Q. Now, I just wanted to point out how awesome it is to finally actually have a figure of this guy. I also do recall the time he was leaked from the leaked listings, and then we finally got to see what he looked like as a figure, and now here he is, in hand. Before we take a closer look at the figure, I also wanted to point out, in my personal opinion, this is not Wheeljack, this is a completely different character, especially if his design was heavily based off of Albert Einstein. He even has the hair. I also wish this character had a little more screen time than what he had overall in the movie. We didn't necessarily get to know much of him other than him just handing out weapons to people. Also, I did like how cool and unique his voice sounded. Wait a minute! I'm not letting you go without my urban combat prototypes! Those are boomsticks, armed in 30 seconds. Again, with his voice, he kind of sounded like he was an experienced scientist and engineer. Kind of like Wheeljack. But before we take a closer look at the figure itself, let's take a quick look at the packaging. Again, this packaging is completely new, both in size and art style, with the omission of the backdrop and the numbering system, which in my opinion, I'd much prefer to at least have the numbering system intact, as it's a pretty good way of keeping track of every single Studio Series figure. But anyways, in my previous review, I did take a look at the Leader Class version of the newer box, but here's a comparison between the 2025 updated packaging and the 2022 to 2024 packaging. As you can see, the newer packaging is a little taller, except for length. However, for width, I think they're the exact same. Almost forgot to mention that the major highlight of the new packaging is that the plastic windows are back, which prevents anybody the opportunity of stealing one's head or other stuff. On the front of the packaging is this nice artwork of Wheeljack, along with some words, names, and logos. On the right side of the packaging is an extension of the front artwork of Wheeljack, and on the left is a closer look at the CGI model of Wheeljack. On the top of the packaging, you get this nice artwork of the Dark of the Moon logo along with his name. On the bottom is Boring Again, and on the back of the packaging is a closer look of what you get inside, along with a license stamp by Mercedes. I think that's what that is. But anyways, I think we're done with the packaging. Now moving back to the figure. To start off, the painting and sculpting is, well, the sculpting is alright, especially for the head, great head sculpt by the way, the chest, and the legs. In my opinion, the arms come out as a little goofy. I also like how they sculpted the skirt. Most of the major complaints have to do with the lack of paint, but I'm sure what would have made this look a little better is if instead of the light gray, this figure would have looked so much better with the dark gray. I mean, they got it right in the packaging, so I'm not sure why this is what came out. The figure also has some smidges of gold and a different color shade of blue to indicate that those are his side hairs. Oh, and let's talk about the kibble, because there's a lot, and it kind of reminds me of the Jolt kibble, especially the backpack kibble, the arm kibble, and the kibble on the back of the feet. The only difference is that there's no car panels on the side of his thighs. But what I do find accurate car kibble wise is of course the shoulder kibble. Everything else is maybe I'm gonna have to look back at the CGI model for reference to see how much kibble this character actually had. For quality, I believe all of his joints move around just fine. However, there's no thanks to the kibble for obstructing certain points of articulation, especially for the legs. Also, this side panel likes to snap off a little too easily for my copy. One more thing to point out is that these two pieces will always find themselves upwards instead of downwards. But other than that, that's all I've got to say for quality. Now moving on to his accessories, he does come with what I guess is a pistol. However, it looks too awkward to be a pistol. Either way, it sticks onto his hand just fine. Also, I can't find any accessory storage for this gun, but I guess that's where this comes to play. I kinda forgot what this is supposed to be. For all I know, it's a staff. That does fit onto his hand. You could also plug it onto the hand like this, which in my opinion I don't recommend doing. The only function I see this staff working best with is to just store on the back, as well as the pistol storing onto the staff that is stored on the backpack. Because I believe it is movie accurate, I think that's the only time I ever saw the staff on screen. It was only when it was stored on his back. But you know what would have been a cool accessory to be included with Q? The rifles he gave to Ironhide, which I'm sure would be included with a Dark of the Moon version of the Studio Series Ironhide anyways, should Hasbro make one. But anyways, I think that's pretty much the gist of the accessories. Why not come with some of the accessories he had as a mainline movie figure or the boomsticks? Well, first of all, those accessories that the mainline Dark of the Moon Q came with would have been cool to see in Studio Series form. But for the boomsticks, second of all, who would hold them? The Sam figurine? Anyways, I think it's time we move on to articulation. Starting off ball joint at the head, which allows the head to move up and down, and swivel. Shoulder pad moves out. The shoulder is on a ball joint, which would allow for a full rotation at the arm, were it not for this. Anyways, bend at the shoulder, bicep swivel, bend at the elbow, gorilla arms, no wrist swivel, no waist swivel, but the side skirts can move out, which allows the legs to bend. Leg can move forward and backwards, thigh swivel, bend at the knee, and lastly the foot can move up and down. And there you have Dark of the Moon Q's articulation. I honestly don't know what to say for his arms, because they function both as gorilla arms and normal arms in a way. Moving on to size comparison, starting off with some other Wheeljack figures that I own. Here he is next to the Bumblebee movie Wheeljack, mainline Rise of the Beasts Pablo, Studio Series Rise of the Beasts Wheeljack. Also, here he is next to Jolt, which handles the grayness much better than whatever they came up with for Q. Take notes, Hasbro, of your older notes. For some size comparisons between him and some other fellow Autobot companions from Dark of the Moon, here he is next to the Core Class version of Dark of the Moon Bumblebee, Deluxe Class Dark of the Moon Bumblebee, Sam, Sideswipe, Dino, Leadfoot, Topspin, Roadbuster, Ratchet, Byway Ironhide, which is the closest thing I have to a Dark of the Moon themed Studio Series Ironhide, Jetwing Optimus Prime, Jetwing Optimus Prime's trailer, the latest version of the Byway knockoff of the Studio Series 32 Optimus Prime mold, and cause why not, here he is next to Ultra Magnus, technically speaking, Sentinel Prime, Byway Sentinel Prime. For some Dark of the Moon Decepticon comparisons, here he is next to Pink Laserbeak, the second most recent Dark of the Moon Studio Series figure, Hatchet, Soundwave, and the bird version of Laserbeak, Barricade, Traincase, Crowbar, Shockwave, Byway Shockwave, Crazy Purple Byway Shockwave, and lastly, here he is next to the Dark of the Moon Leader Class Megatron, and his little ugly green thing. But one more thing, here he is next to the rest of the Autobot cast from Dark of the Moon, or at least the ones that did get figures. Aside from some missing Dark of the Moon themed twins and a Dark of the Moon themed Ironhide with his different accessories, it's hard to believe that most of the characters from Dark of the Moon have their own figures. Hopefully in the future we do get to see a Dark of the Moon themed Ironhide directly from Hasbro, and whenever the twins finally get their own figures, it would be nice to see their Dark of the Moon versions too. But someday, says the designer, someday. But hey, at least it's not happening. I hope we get to see them soon. As for seeing Studio Series figures of Autobots that appeared from the concept art, video games, and even comics, that's another story. For now, be sure to let me know down in the comments which figure out of all these figures over here do you like the most, and be sure to let me know down in the comments what other Autobot from the extended lore of Dark of the Moon you would like to see be made into a Studio Series figure next. Anyways, now I believe it's the time we get down to transformation, which in my opinion is not bad. To start off, move the arms out, untab these panels, same thing for the other panel, untab this whole section, also bring this part out, and then leave it there for now, because then we're going to work on the legs. Shift this whole assembly inwards, bring the foot down, close in this blue piece, and then rotate this inwards, close this in. Once you folded this leg in, you can go ahead and connect the two. In case you had the side skirts spread out, you can go ahead and push them down, and then after that, we work on the arms. To start off, rotate this 180, rotate this just a tad bit, and then fold this piece in, and then close it in right there. You're going to want to make sure that it goes in right there, whilst at the same time tabbing it onto the rest of this. Same thing for the other arm. Make sure the two tab in together. And then we work on this mumbo jumbo. For starters, spread out the flat panels, Close this in, and then here comes my not so favorite part. Make sure you close the front wheel in all the way. Then I think you want to shift this downwards, and then make sure that this closes onto that blue tab, as well as this whole flat panel collapsing onto the rest of the car. And you do the same thing for the other side. And now here we have Studio Series Dark of the Moon Q in his alt mode, which I gotta say is a nice looking car. As you can see, it's a Mercedes. They also happen to have the logo here. I would like to point out how spot on this car mode is to the actual car. The car also does appear spotless in terms of kibble sticking out, except for the back, of course. But other than that, much like Studio Series Jolt's Chevy alt mode, they also did a pretty good job on Q's Mercedes alt mode, which I guess the sacrifice of the two is that their robot modes were kibble-tastic. At least they still came with some okay accessories. One's accessories being better than the other, of course. Speaking of accessories, this figure does have accessory storage in the alt mode, which is stored on the side of the car. Almost forgot to mention how accurate his wheels are, especially considering the fact they added that little silver-ish lining to the wheels. But other than that, there's not much to say for the car mode. But what can I say about the transformation? It's alright. It's pretty straightforward, whilst slightly fiddly at the same time. Honestly, I don't know why I said something about the transformation after talking about the car mode. Remind me next time to do it the other way. For a brief comparison, here he is alongside some other blue cars, starting with Jolt's alt mode, Topspin's alt mode, and then here he is next to the two. They may be a little similar in color, but they're most definitely different in shape and size. Be sure to let me know down in the comments which alt mode you prefer though. And then for just one more brief comparison, here he is next to the Bumblebee movie Wheeljack, Rise of the Beasts Wheeljack, and then here he is next to the other two. All three are pretty great alt modes, but be sure to leave a comment down below which one strikes you the most. Anyways, I think that's pretty much all I had to say for the Studio Series Dark of the Moon Deluxe Class Q. Overall, he is okay. The details, for at least the front of the figure, are a bit of an upgrade, especially the head sculpt, but the kibble management, I believe, is pretty much similar to the original Dark of the Moon Deluxe Class Q, and the arms are still goofy. Same thing with the accessories, but if you have long anticipated a Studio Series Dark of the Moon Q, don't feel afraid to make a purchase. If you are looking to pick this figure up, I believe he's sold out on Amazon, but I believe you might have a good chance of picking this figure up on retail, at least Walmart. I'm not sure about either Target or GameStop. Let me know in the comments if you have spotted this figure at either both. Hopefully he does get restocked online. Otherwise, that would be a bummer to miss out. If you like what you saw in this video, be sure to slam that like button, share this with your friends, turn on post notifications so that way you don't miss another upload. Let me know how I did in this review, and most importantly, be sure to hit that big red subscribe button. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Thank you very much for watching. Teo! Also, did I forget to mention that the figure's feet can technically move from side to side? And you could also do this with his accessories, or this.